Welcome into the Talkin Tide podcast on the Pigskin Podcast Network. I'm Chase Goodbread, sports columnist with the Tuscaloosa News, joined as I am every time by Travis Reier, the longtime senior analyst at BamaOnline.com. You can get the Talkin Tide podcast anywhere you receive your podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, of course. Get us on YouTube, get us on Facebook, our web host, of course, megaphone.fm. Twitter feed, Talkin_Tide. Give us a follow there, and you'll find links as quickly as they come to our podcast. And want to quickly thank our sponsors, North River Dental Associates and Peterbrook Chocolatier of Tuscaloosa, DraftKings as well. All right, Travis, the Nick Saban, Jimbo Fisher aftermath. You would think, right, after 4 or 5 days, I guess it's been that, it's not like we jumped on the air right away when this, it's been a lot of time for the aftermath, and yet feels like here on Sunday night there's still meat on the bone, I'd say.
No, there's still plenty of meat on that bone, and especially when you bring primetime into the mix to go along with it. So it wasn't just that this involved a couple of people very familiar with each other. The mentor and disciple angle had certainly been discussed a lot, and Jimbo had become the first disciple to beat his old boss last season. So, and then just sort of like a bolt of lightning midweek. Here comes the comments from Nick Saban, and you just knew Thursday was going to be something else after Wednesday night. You knew Jimbo wasn't just going to let that come and go unacknowledged. And then, primetime wasn't either. So Thursday shaped up to be a doozy during a time of the year when we're thinking, well, probably going to be pretty quiet going into Destin and SEC meetings coming up, spring meetings coming up. Maybe as we get closer to July and media days, some things will percolate. But wow, it got crazy midweek.
If you're the SID at Texas A&M, do you even bother, Travis, trying to get Jimbo to go with a statement over a presser? Do you even
Well, it doesn't matter. The SID didn't matter because Jimbo was going to have a press conference, whether it involved the SID. He was just going to set it up himself, and you knew that was coming. And boy, Jimbo didn't spare much, did he? Said it's over, it's done between Nick Saban and Jimbo Fisher, and not that October 8th was going to need much more juice, I don't think. Although we had big hopes for the game last season. And while A&M ultimately did pull the upset, they stumbled against Arkansas and Mississippi State in the lead up to that game, which took away some of the intrigue, the championship aspect of it. So hopefully the Aggies will be able to maintain course before they get to Tuscaloosa.
It'll be circled in red ink on that calendar.
Oh,
right? all
yes.
And
blood
College
red.
Station and
blood red.
And College Station as well. So,
The ticket man liked that. He liked that.
He likes it fine, yeah.
The CBS man and the ticket man, they both like that. And CBS, I mean, is there any doubt now that's going to be prime time?
It's got to be.
It's got to be prime time. If last year's game was thought to be big enough in advance to go ahead and hand it primetime status, come on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was, but the the one take about the fracus, or I say one take, I ended up having to put about 9 of them in print over a couple of days, but I just one of the aspects to it that drew me, Travis, is that obviously Jimbo went way more personal. I mean, if Saban threw a handful of mud, Jimbo came with the truckload. That's for sure. But at the end of the day, Travis, what he was complaining about was a guy who was throwing something out there he couldn't or wouldn't prove, right? Basically a tease kind of thing. Well, what did Jimbo do? He did the exact same.
Jimbo had a chance to come out looking great. If he takes a little more of the high road and maybe has some fun with it. Just, hey, good to know that we're on Nick's radar. That maybe Nick's worried about us now. We beat him last season. We had this great recruiting class. It's just nice to know that when we talk about the greatest of all time, maybe we're living in Nick's head a little bit. But no, Jimbo came off as bad or worse, maybe worse, in my opinion, because some of the things he alluded to, like, yeah, I know there is a collective, but I don't really know how it works.
Right.
Come on, man. Things like that. Really, I thought Dion came off looking the best probably in all this, because that was probably, I think we agree, I think that was Nick's biggest mistake in all of it.
Or how about the tweet from Travis Hunter?
He
might have had the greatest take of the whole thing, right?
Yeah, it was an amazing 24 to 48 hours. And like you said, it's going to continue to sort of simmer, I guess, and then we'll rekindle it, I'm sure, as we get closer to SEC spring meetings coming up here in the next couple weeks. And then, I mean, even though they're not going to be on the same day at SEC media days, it's going to be on the marquee there, I guess, in Atlanta this year, right?
Bedlam is the word.
Jimbo. Yes. Jimbo's smart, though. Jimbo's smart to say that about the collective and not really knowing what goes on, because that gives him a buffer. Because when he gets players that are pissed about their deals, he can somehow look at them and say, I don't really know how all that works.
It's not
sure, you bet.
It's not an incredible thing to say, you know what I mean?
It is incredible, but no, it isn't. But he's going to run that out there when he gets when all this starts to become difficult with players. That gives him that buffer there, because but I will say this: if he is out there directly recruiting with it to players, then he's still going to have to face some backlash, because it's going to go back to, remember when recruiting promises, Chase, were just limited to like playing time and maybe some things like that, and how much that's changed now. It's never, and we've said this, it's never been tougher to be a college head coach than right now.
It would shake the plate tectonics at the top. I mean, there's no question that the more it becomes just a straight up money grab.
Yeah.
The big Texas schools are going to prosper. Oregon will prosper if it wants to. Notre Dame's better off. And I haven't made the full list, but those are the ones off the top of my head that are going to be just fine with all that.
There's another angle that's out there that I wanted to throw at you with all this, and that Nick's comments were measured in that he was basically letting the fan base and the alumni and the Alabama money know, we got to get our money up.
Yeah.
But I don't even think you have to send that bat signal out to the Alabama folks, do you? They're ready. Like, just tell us when, coach, or this isn't Mike Shula making those calls. But I'm saying. This is Nick Saban. If that's what he wants to do, if that's what he ends up having to do, as he intimated there in that gathering last Wednesday night.
I wouldn't be surprised if Saban sees what I see, though, in terms of how even though you're right, there's no. You'd have to be hard pressed to name another booster club that's not more at the ready. But pockets are pockets. You got what you got in them. And there's some awfully deep ones out there that haven't been really in Texas hadn't been in the game competitively. Right. Oregon's been more competitive, but certainly not much of a playoff.
Yeah, and you're right. Texas money is different when you're talking UT and A&M. I mean, A&M, you're looking at an endowment of $1 billion. Okay, isn't a B. That isn't the case even at places like Alabama that have folks that literally in estate planning and think wealthy folks that make that commitment in perpetuity to Alabama. So no, I get your point on that too. But I think it was another case where, okay, you wanted to go to more hurry up offense. You wanted to go to some different things, transfer portal. And at every turn, Nick Saban has cautioned folks against those things. And meanwhile, he's made the adjustment, and Alabama has made those type of things their own in the process. And this has the feel of that too. Okay. I mean, I don't think the pockets are as deep, certainly, when you talk about Alabama, and maybe even comparison to A&M, but folks are willing to give whatever they can to make it happen, to make the W's happen. I know there's a lot of fans that on message boards and sports talk radio talk about how disenfranchised they feel because of the portal and NIL. But when September the 5th or September the 3rd rolls around, they're going to be right there ready and hoping for another national championship run, regardless of how it comes about.
Turning to the administrative side of the whole discussion, Travis. All right, hypothetically, I hand you a blank check. I hand you a pen. You fill in your name and whatever the number it would take for you to be the next president of the NCAA.
No, you don't have your pen would run out of ink doing the zeros. There wouldn't be enough room on that. No, you know what though? That's where I think there's this sort of disconnect from the public in terms of what they think the head of the NCAA really is able to get done first and foremost, because he or she is going to work at the behest of the school presidents, right? It's like Roger Goodell in the NFL.
Right.
He works on behalf of the 32 team owners. Essentially, that's his job.
That's one similarity.
That's it. And so one of the reasons why Roger Goodell makes the money he makes is because he stands up there and takes the bullets. When things aren't good or when the leadership is perceived bad, how the hell are you supposed to lead when essentially you're being told the direction by, 100 plus, 200, 300 plus school presidents? So
see the dollars on the legal fees they've been spending too.
That's what I mean. That's where I don't get where everybody, oh, well, man, it's time to Mark Emmert needs to go. Now I will say this, in terms of publicly at least coming off as being even in the loop with where things were headed in advance of NIL and the transfer portal and things like that, that's where Emmert just came off as a failure, because he wasn't proactive. He wasn't in front, right? And the NCAA needs like a Sankey type in that regard. That isn't always worried about being first, maybe, but certainly when things of seismic nature start to even show up on the horizon,
right,
in the pipeline, there is at least an address given to it and made to that, which is something. It just seemed like with Mark Emmert, it was never. It was always after the fact, and it was like, oh shit, more than no. We understand. We understand what's coming. Here's what we're working on to try to deal with this situation. It always just felt more reactionary with Emmert than you would like.
When I think of Emmert's tenure, I think of the ROTC kid and near the end of Animal House, Travis, who holds up their hands and says all is well, and just
after it's
right on the sidewalk.
Chaos. Yeah. No, I think that's a great analogy. Yeah, for sure.
It's
remain calm.
But you're right. They're about to find out how hard it is, right? And Emmert didn't help himself in so many ways.
No, it's out there now. How are you gonna roll this back?
His decision to cling to the old longer than he probably should have or could have, I think that was the word. However, that said, man, the next whoever it is, it's a near impossible task.
He just. They need someone that isn't afraid to go to the college presidents And if they need to be shook and kind of brought into reality about, look, I understand what you want and what you prefer, but this is what's going to happen whether you want it to or not. And we can either get out in front of this and roll with it and sort of be meshed and intertwined with the movement going forward, or we can get dusted entirely and then be left in total and complete scramble mode while also coming off publicly as an entirely complete embarrassment that is so far behind that we can't catch up. We can't even attempt to roll some of this back.
Did you catch the comment from Gene Smith, the Ohio State AD?
I try not to listen to him much, but
he's on the transformation committee, I believe, with Sankey
transformation
and others.
committee. I like that.
But his thought was, sooner or later, we're going, regardless of how bleak it might look legally, sooner or later you better fight for something in court because the alternative is you don't exist anymore. So
you will become obsolete.
So
and we're on the threshold of that. Doesn't it feel that way?
Yeah.
I mean, what's next, really?
It almost sounded like, though, he's going to be looking to pick the first fight he can find. You know what I mean? As opposed to laying back and letting time roll by.
You know who sits back idly, though, I think, and enjoys all this, Goodbread?
Who's that?
The television networks. I think the television networks almost pine for the day that it goes to 30 or 40 teams.
Mm-hmm.
And then every game on television means something.
They got you.
But then at the same time, if you're one of those 30 or 40 schools, think about how much the revenue is going to go up. Mm-hmm. I mean, the TV deals are going to become even more lucrative, aren't they? If you're playing a 12-game schedule and there's not an FCS or even a group of 5 on there, you're playing a 12-game schedule, even if you go to 9 or 10 SEC games. And by the way, your 2 or 3 non-cons are like Oklahoma State, USC, and let's say North Carolina.
Right.
You know, they would love that. And they will pay bigger dollars than they're even paying right now.
And the head, right? It's a depth improver because the top might be the same, right? Your marquee 1, 2, 3, they're going to do the same numbers at least. They're going to do the same numbers as they ever have, if not better. They're not going to come down because you're bringing the bottom up.
Yeah. And I think the schools would benefit from that too, because I think more people would be inclined to go to the ballpark. So this sort of maximizing of every revenue stream that the Power Fives have attempted to do since coming up with, say, their own networks for the leagues and doing the deals like they've done for the SEC network and ESPN and CBS and all those things. I think they would have a better chance of achieving that fruition of complete and total fulfillment of revenue streams in that type of scenario than they are now, because folks just aren't going to come out for New Mexico State or Mercer or games like that, or you're just not going to sell the tickets like you would. But if you had Power Fives every week,
right, but it's already headed in that direction pretty quickly, because Travis, if the SEC jumps to a 9-game conference schedule, and you look at what Alabama's already locked down 2026 and beyond, that's when it kicks in, where they're playing 2 Power Fives non-con a year. All right, you add that in with a 9-game conference schedule,
and they're getting out of the neutrals.
Now, now we're talking 4 years from now. There's only going to be one real homecoming game.
Yeah, and that's something Saban's been kind of angling towards again. That seems like a lot of folks are a little bit kicking and screaming in their willingness to come on board with that. But you're right, that's where we look to be headed.
Talkin Tide podcast on the Pigskin Podcast Network. Chase Goodbread, Travis Reier with you a little bit longer here. Going to thank our sponsors here really quickly. We're going to start by telling you all about North River Dental Associates. Dr. Jack Smalley, that great staff of dental hygienists, any kind of dentistry you need, whether it's the pediatric dentistry, laser dentistry, endodontics, you name it. The teeth whitening service is always popular. And on a routine cleaning, you go get them twice a year over at Dr. Jack's. Going to have you in and out of there in less than an hour typically. So super experienced. The phone number 752-3506. It's North River Dental Associates.
I'm going to tell you about Peterbrook Chocolatier right there in the Indian Hill section of Tuscaloosa. I know there's a lot of road work going on. I know, right? Stop me if you've heard this one before when it comes to Tuscaloosa. But right there on McFarland there in the Indian Hill section of Tuscaloosa, advancements being made to the roadways. I guess I'll put it kindly and put it that way. But no worries. They're still good to go right there at Peterbrook Chocolatier. Still easy access right there off McFarland Boulevard. And wow, store looks as great as it ever has. They've transitioned from more of the spring look, the Easter holiday, into the summer look. And summer, of course, means summer chocolate camps at Peterbrook Chocolatier. You can get yourself involved in one of those at 205-752-0211. They'll get you set up. And as always, just a great place to stop. The chocolate strawberries, the chocolate popcorn, the chocolate carousel they have right there in the middle of the establishment. And you know what else? With summer cranking up, it's a great time to pick up some of that Italian ice cream, the gelato. Multiple 6 or 7 great flavors from which to choose. And we're getting close to those free scoop Wednesdays of gelato. I'll tell you more about that in the coming weeks. But Peterbrook Chocolatier, 1530 McFarland Boulevard North. You need to make it happen today.
Finally, really quickly, going to tell you about our corporate sponsor, DraftKings. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app on your phone. Give them that promo code TPPN. That's the Pigskin Podcast Network. And hey, you're off and running with the NBA postseason. $5 bet. Any team to win in the NBA playoffs here turns into $150 in free bets if your team wins. That's at the DraftKings Sportsbook. Be sure to download it. TPPN, your promo code is DraftKings. All right, Travis, we'll shut it down here with a few more minutes. Want to recap this Alabama softball season that ended here just a few hours prior to our Sunday nighter recording. I was over there, wrote one up, saw 14 innings, every bit of a game for all but one inning, basically. Stanford falls to Alabama 4-0 in the early game, which was played at 10 a.m. They rescheduled it because of weather concerns. Montana Fouts blanks them, Travis. Then she turns around and puts up 5 more blanks in game 2. Ends up giving up a couple of tough runs in the 6th. In trouble again in the 7th. But what an incredible performance by her.
No, she was plenty good enough, and she typically is. But when they needed her the most in that early game on Sunday, she was fantastic. And they finally got a couple of clutch hits. They've just really struggled offensively down the stretch. And, it seemed like to be the imperfect storm. Some of their veterans, some of their staples throughout the season had been very solid. And some of the freshmen had stepped up. Bloodworth, Goodnight, during the first half to 2/3 of the season had been very good. Tal is a veteran that you typically can count on. And she did come through in the early game on Sunday, but just not enough from that lineup top to bottom. I think other than Ashley Prangy, once you got beyond her, really, to me anyway, it seemed like some far too easy outs late in the season. And, those things happen. That's softball, but Montana was great. The injury to Lexi Kilfoyle obviously was not ideal, and not having that depth that you'd like to have in the circle, but Montana was plenty good enough. It just game 2 on Sunday, at some point, you got to help her out and put some pressure on Stanford, with your offense. And Alabama just wasn't able to do that. And I know there's a lot of Alabama fans are not happy. It was a historic sort of result because of how dominant Alabama's been in the postseason in regional play. But I think that's also a testament to the job done by Patrick Murphy. If you're upset about Alabama softball tonight and you're upset at Patrick Murphy, well, that's in large part because of the job he's done. And I know you wrote about this, but it's true. they look to be in really good shape moving forward from a roster perspective, without knowing what could happen in the transfer portal and those type of things, because they were hurt by that. Because when you lose a Skylar Wallace to Florida, you lose a KB Sides to Arkansas, and even if you backfill with an Ali Shipman coming in from Tennessee and an Ashley Prangy coming in from Ohio State, you're still not at a net positive in terms of elite type of players.
Right. Yeah, Murphy, an unreal job, streak of 16, would have been 17 straight, but the COVID year, Travis, of course, they didn't get the postseason really even going at all in 2020. But 17 years, 16 straight for Patrick Murphy to reach the super regionals, and I agree with you. The bottom of the lineup definitely had its struggles statistically all year. It was a top heavy lineup. I don't think there's any question for Alabama that. But Murphy sounded pretty upbeat that's something that they can they can make some strides on going into next season. And obviously he feels good about the pitching coming back too. But disappointing way to go out for sure. But man, I couldn't have been more impressed with Bounce. And I'll say this too, Travis. Even if the number 2 starter had been able to maybe sub in sooner, had she been healthy, ready to go, maybe you get Fouts out a little quicker and save a couple of 3 runs. Doesn't matter because you still never scored. Right.
That's the problem, is when, as good as Montana is and as much as she can just go and mount up the innings and the pitches and the strikeouts and all those things, eventually, even more so than so many people equate fast pitch softball to baseball, and it doesn't really match up in a lot of ways. But in the fundamental ways of pressure, eventually bursting pipes, if you can do that, then that's obviously going to be huge. And Alabama, just too much down the stretch, wasn't able to do that.
Stanford coach said they had Fouts at 72 in her last inning of the second game.
No, that the velocity's just, she's consistent with it, man. That's not a problem at all. But think of it this way too. If you could in baseball run the same pitcher out there for 14 innings, at some point that other team is going to have some success just because they're exposed so much to that one pitcher, right? No matter how hard he or she throws, or can locate, or has a multitude of pitches, at some point that familiarity is going to prove beneficial. So even though Stanford lost game 1, they brought their ace in. I understand that, but I thought Stanford was smart. Once that game got to 4-0, they got her out of there,
right?
Because they didn't want UA's hitters getting any more looks at her than they had already gotten, because she was coming back in game 2. Whereas with Montana, is talented and is determined and as much of an elite competitor as she is, she's got what she's got, and it's elite stuff. But after you see it for 10, 12, 14 innings in succession, you're probably going to have some success.
Murphy, interestingly, and we'll get out of here in just a minute. We're up against the end of another episode of Talkin Tide. One of the things Murphy said was that he thought the changeups on both sides were all the difference. He said Fouts' changeup was the best he's seen it in her whole career, and he said
it was.
He said they couldn't touch the changeup either.
No. And now Walter, she had that in her repertoire for Stanford, and then she throws the drop ball exceptionally well, where Montana's throwing that rise ball at 70 plus. And but that was very interesting in that first game, especially when she mixed in that changeup. Not only that she did it as frequently, but she did it from really the outset.
Yeah. All right. That's going to do it for this edition of the Talkin Tide podcast. For Travis Reier of BamaOnline.com, I'm Chase Goodbread of the Tuscaloosa News. Be sure to join us next time right here on Talkin Tide.